You probably hopefully watched the Duarte video and recognized that Nancy Duarte emphasizes that you should stress for design, not decoration. But what does that really mean? So let's think about this for a second. When you design a house, what are you doing? You're laying out where the bedroom should be, where the kitchen should be, how big the room should be, the entry points, the windows, the exit points. You're laying out the structure of the house. Now when you decorate the house, what are you doing? You're adding things after the house has been built. You are adding touches of color or interest to your house. It's the flowers or the paint or something like that it decorates your home. But if it isn't well designed, the decorations aren't going to help. The same thing is true with a speech. You want to design your speech visually, not just decorate it. So what does that mean? What exactly is visual design? Visual design has lots of different components, but I want to focus today on 5 very important components. Simplicity, contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. And you'll notice that those letters spell scrap. And what we want to emphasize and help you understand is most of the time you should scrap the crap. If you listen to Duarte's video, you'll know that she said that most of the creative process is destructive. The same principle applies for visuals in a speech. When you get rid of the clutter, you have something that can actually impact your audience. So let's take each one of these principles in turn, and let me give you some examples of what they look like on a visual aid. Here's the first one, simplicity. This is a great quote. Simplicity means subtracting the obvious and adding the meaningful. And that's important because most of the time we're interested in decorating our slide by adding stuff, when in fact all that does is get in the way of our audience understanding the message. There's an iPod here for a reason, because if you know anything about Steve Jobs, maybe you read Walter Isaacson's biography of him, Steve Jobs was a designer first, and he was extremely particular about the design and the function of his products, which is one of the reasons they are so successful, because they're very simple and easy to use. There's nothing extraneous there that you don't need or that doesn't have a purpose. And that is the core of simplicity. Here's another example. Look at the slide in the top left. Take a second and count the number of colors that you see. 4, 5, 6? How many arrows do you see? And circles do you see? This is a slide that somebody put together to demonstrate how much stuff they could put on their slide and how they could use their software. This example and the next couple of examples come from a book called Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds, who really stresses the Zen of creating visual aids and stresses the concept of simplicity. If you look at the after slide, it's very obvious what the point of the slide is, that the Japanese are very thin and Americans aren't. Maybe it's because they eat sushi, maybe not. The point is, it's easy to tell very quickly what the point of the slide is and the information on it. Let's look at another example. In the top left there, you see the before. Again, how many colors do you see? And what a horrible background. What's the purpose of that background? And why do we need data from all the countries that you actually have data on? What's really important, if you look at the after slide, is that the U.S. spends the most dollars per capita on health expenditures, and other countries spend far less than we do. So these things take away from what you're trying to say to your audience. Here's another example. Obviously, the information relates to bikes, and so someone thought it was a nice idea to put a picture of bikes behind the chart. But it doesn't help you understand how many bikes are sold. All it does is confuse your eye as to where the eye should look, where your interest should be drawn. So we want to keep it simple for our audience by helping them see more quickly what we're trying to say. That's the point. And simplicity is a key concept. Here's the last one. Very simple. The information is definitely easy to obtain by quickly looking at the slide. They've done a nice job of using larger text to help what's really the most important fact stand out on the slide. That's simplicity. Let's look then at contrast. Contrast is another way to help your audience see what is most important really quickly. Using colors that contrast with the background, using colors that contrast with one another is an important way to help your audience get the information more rapidly. It's obvious here that students are texting in class, but I know you're not texting right now because you're watching this video. So my point is that you can use colors to help your audience's eye go to exactly what you want them to pay attention to. Here's another example. Obviously here, all the bars from the other countries are the same color. There's no reason to have bars of different colors just to use all the colors. Sometimes when you put all those colors on a slide, that's called the fruit salad effect. And you don't need to do that, nor is it really good for your audience. It doesn't help at all communicate your message. Here, just 3 simple colors, the blue, the red, the white, maybe the light gray lines to help see exactly the amounts of the carbon footprint. That's what's important on this slide, and it's easy to determine. Next one is repetition. Repetition does not mean boring. Repetition just means using repetitive design elements to give your slides a cohesive, unified look. What are the repetitive design elements that you see on this slide right here? You see a blue bar across the top. You see a gray bar across the bottom. Those are pretty obvious. There are a few that are more subtle. Notice the parentheses that are used in the second and third slide to help frame what the speaker is trying to say, what the audience should be focusing on. Notice the varying use of sizing to help the audience focus on certain words as well. Why do you think the logo is not repeated on the other 2 slides? Probably because it doesn't add anything. This is again the principle of simplicity. The logo's nice for the first slide, but it's not necessary on every single slide. Now, sometimes you might be tempted to use a template. Templates come with your software, and those are really good for helping provide uniformity and consistency in the elements across your slides, but not necessarily the right design layout that works for your content. So there's a fine line there between using templates that come with your software, and all of the softwares have them, Keynote, Prezi, PowerPoint. Some are better than others for using or for ensuring uniformity. But they also can lock you into a layout structure that doesn't work for your content and may in fact be boring and not suitable. So be careful about using a template that comes with your software. Here's another example of repetition and how you can carry design elements through your presentation. If you look at the 4 pictures here, they represent 4 different slides. Without the repetitive design elements of the paperclip and the red box, you might have no idea that these slides are connected. But putting those small touches there helps you, the audience or the viewer, recognize that somehow these slides are tied together, and the speaker would fill in the information about exactly how they were tied together. But still, the repetitive design elements help provide uniformity to the slide here. Let's look at the next principle, which is alignment. Alignment really is more than just left justifying or right justifying words on your slide. There's a lot more to that, and I want to take you through some of the things to be aware of when you're putting images and text on a slide. When we see images, our eye is naturally drawn to things that are left aligned, because in the Western world, and remember that, the Western world reads from left to right, and so we tend to look for things that are left aligned when we're reading. So what happens though if you purposely misalign something? You could use misalignment, as long as it's purposeful, to help draw your viewer's eye to that as well. And that could be a useful tool when you really want to pull their attention to a certain spot on your slide or a certain piece of information. You purposely misalignment. But sometimes what I see often in slides, what I see students doing, is something like this. there's this tendency to want to center everything, as if somehow centering text, lines of text, is going to use up the space on the slide better or look more professional, and that's really not the case. Centering text, particularly several lines of text, isn't going to help your audience read it any faster. And as a matter of fact, their eye is going to do a little zigzag Z motion trying to find the starting and ending point of each line. And because it's not in the same place, it's going to be that much slower for them to read what's on your screen. So centering is not necessarily your best option when you have lines of text. If you have a title on your slide, that's different. But we're talking about a body of text such as you see here. Let's look at what happens when all we do is change the alignment of this text. It's much cleaner and much easier to read. Number one, we reduce our lines of text from 4 to 3, which are fewer lines to process, but because it's all left justified, it does make it easier to read for your audience. We've also brought the title and the body text closer together. That's proximity. We're getting there, so hang on. Let's look at another example of the concept of alignment. Now look at this particular slide. You'll probably see it doesn't look right. You might not be able to articulate exactly what doesn't look right about it, but I'm going to point that out, and after it, you'll see. So the first thing you might notice is that the pictures are not the same size, nor are they properly aligned. The second thing you might notice is that the word lighting is not equally spaced between the two pictures. And that's a problem. It looks off. Third thing, the text underneath the actual pictures, nor is it the same font, but it's not centered well under the pictures or even on the slide itself. The bars are not the same width. The numbers are not in the same places. And the text underneath the chart is not even the same style. So there are a lot of things that are not aligned on this particular slide here. And we want to fix those. So we need to make things A, repetitive, and B, well aligned in order to give our slide a cleaner, more professional look. So here's the redesign fixing all of those elements. It's the same text, but it looks a lot cleaner. Things are aligned properly, the images are the same size, and you have a more professional looking slide that's easy to read. What is proximity? Our fifth concept. Proximity has to do with spacing, and it answers the question, what goes with what? Now, what does proximity have to do with things on your slide? Because how closely spaced together or how far apart things are on your slide indicates the relationship that those two things have together. Are they related or are they not related? And are you using proximity or spacing to help your audience understand the relationships of the images on your slide? So if I ask you now to count these dots, how many do you see? Probably 8. You should see 8. If you don't, get your vision checked. But you should see 8. But now, how could I show that they are going together, that they belong in a group? I could put a box around them to show they're in a group. When we put things around objects, we show that they're together. But this box doesn't add anything to our understanding of the dots. What if I displayed them in groups this way? Because now you're counting by twos, and you can count to 8 much faster by twos than you can singly. And that is an important fundamental concept when you're talking about proximity. Let's look at this on a slide and what that really means to help your audience, your listener, see what goes with what quicker. So here's a typical title slide. Typical because everything is equally spaced apart. It has the name of the presentation, the creator of the presentation, and the place where the person works. So there are a couple of problems with this slide here. First of all, it's all spaced apart. One other problem has to do with having the word leadership right at the bottom of the slide by itself. Anytime you have a word on the bottom of the slide by itself, we call that an orphan. And those usually do not look good from a graphic design layout perspective. You don't want orphans. So we need to restructure this to put the things that are similar closer together and put more space between things that aren't similar. So let's take a look at the next two possible redesigns of pretty much the same information. In slide number 1 at the top left, you can see that we have put the title 2 lines together with a lot of space, and then the name of the researcher and her position, and then the icon at the bottom. So it's very clear and evident that the title is at the top, and then some other information is in the middle, and an icon is at the bottom. In the number 2 slide, you can see that we pretty much have the information at the top. The title is the same, but now the icon is in the middle, and the other information is across the bottom. But look what else we did on number 2. We lightened some of the words that are not as important as the other words. Obviously, we put the green in there to draw your eye and to work with the icon for repetition of design elements, but we lightened to use some contrast as well to help you understand that that is not as important information as the title or the researcher. Here's another way you could do the same thing. This is just with a black background. Again, we've moved design elements around, continued the use or repeated the use of the green across the screen, but now everything is very right aligned. There's some empty space on the left of that slide. So what? It's clean, it's nice. You don't need to fill all of the space on a slide just because it's empty space. Empty space is good. Now, I often get asked the question, should I use light backgrounds with dark text or dark backgrounds with light text? It really depends on what kind of room you're presenting in. Are you presenting in a dark room? If so, then you might want light slides, light background with darker text. If you're presenting in a dark room where you'll turn the lights out or there aren't any windows or anything, then you might want the other kind of slides. So dark room, light slides, lighter room, darker slides. Sometimes you don't know what kind of room you'll be in, so you pick what works for your content and your material. So let's look at some examples of putting all 5 of these concepts together and what it really looks like. You ever seen anything like this? I have. Not pretty. Using the 5 principles we've talked about, simplicity, contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity, some things probably jump out at you quite obviously. The first is, it might be hard to read the text on the dark background. That's because there's not enough contrast. There is plenty of contrast between the white box and the background, but that's not meaningful. It doesn't add anything to your slide here. And of course, the silly clip art probably jumped out at you and drew your eye right away as well. That doesn't add anything either except to be silly. So there are a couple of things wrong with this slide, and one other thing is it's a lot of words. It's 4 complete sentences. Most of the time when you are, unless you're putting a quote on a slide, you don't need to write in complete sentences as you would in a paper. You want as few words as possible. So let's redesign this slide. Let's make a first attempt at redesigning this slide a little bit to take care of the contrast problem, to take care of the box and the silly clip art, and see if we can reduce the amount of words, the number of words on this slide, so that what we do have up there is easier and quicker to read. So here's what we might have. We could start with better contrast. This looks a lot better, a dark background with a light contrast. And we could build our bullets one at a time. We're going to talk about animation in the next section. But if we build them one at a time, it prevents your audience from reading ahead of you, and they are more likely to stay with you. So we put them all up there, and the first 3 are nice phrases, and the 4th one came up in a different way, so the animation was different, which is not good. And also, it's 2 lines. It's still a complete sentence where the first 3 are phrases. And that's a small but important principle to remember when you are trying to create good professional slides is consistency. This is part of repetition as well, that all of your bullets should begin with the same grammatical structure. In the first 3, it's a verb. Drink, read, smile, but that 4th one is a complete sentence. So how could we rewrite that sentence so that it is parallel? That's another way that you might have heard consistency in your writing, so that your bullet forms are parallel. How could we reword that 4th one? We could say something like, make family and friends most important, or ensure family and friends are the most important, or something like that, so that all 4 bullets start with the same grammatical structure. But still, think about what you're talking about here. You're talking about New Year's resolutions. Does your audience need to see what words that you think are your most important resolutions? No, maybe you want to have something that's a little more visual that just talks about what their resolutions are. And having a picture of the calendar of January 1st when everyone begins to make their resolutions might be a better way to communicate visually with the audience, and then you fill in the motivational information or the persuasive information that you want the audience to remember. Because the focus really needs to be on you, the speaker, not your audience reading your slides.